This is not the first time Reed Larson has descended from heaven to an unknown planet. Over the years of his work as a traveler, he has seen countless worlds, barren deserts, ocean planets, wild jungles where every branch could be the beginning of the end. But Vidiian was different. From the very first moment, when his ship, breaking through the thin atmosphere, began to slowly descend to the surface of the planet, he felt that this world was alive in the most literal sense. The cabin of the ship began to vibrate as the engines reduced thrust. Through the window, Reed could see dense forests covered with dense tree crowns rushing under him. Their shades varied from deep emerald to almost inky green, depending on how the light fell at an acute angle. The sunlight was bright, but not harsh, and it enveloped the forests in a soft, diffused glow, making them seem almost unreal. Through this prism, it seemed that the trees themselves created light, exuding it like lanterns on a moonless night. The fact that Vidiian had two suns reinforced this sense of a different reality. Each of them shone from different directions, casting double shadows and creating the feeling that time does not flow here as it does on Earth. Reed had always been able to navigate by the stars, but this was different. Time seemed to stretch out, losing its usual structure. The ship landed gently on the wet ground, leaving almost no trace. A light mist enveloped the hillsides, creeping over the lowlands and hiding the distant peaks. There were none of the harsh, menacing sounds that accompanied him on other planets. There was no deafening roaring wind or the terrifying rustle of wildlife. There was silence all around, not dead, but alive, breathing as if the planet itself was waiting for something, as if it was listening to his approach. Reed stepped out of the ship. My feet sank into soft, moist soil that looked like thick grass, but not quite. The Vidiian surface of the Earth was soft as moss and elastic, as if the planet did not want to be stepped on, but accepted it anyway. Each step threw off light flashes, barely perceptible, but noticeable enough that Reed froze for a moment, checking his perception. He scanned the horizon, but found no familiar shapes. There were no mountains, no familiar topography to guide him. All he saw were endless forests stretching to the very edge, where two suns merged into one, flooding the horizon with radiance. The forest didn't look hostile, but there was something about the silence that made his heart beat faster. It wasn't an alarm, but rather a premonition. It's like the air itself is waiting, Reed thought, taking a deep breath. The humidity in the air, the sweet smell, something like a mixture of wet leaves and wildflowers, all this awakened in him a kind of primal feeling, as if he was part of something ancient, existing long before his arrival. Reed headed for the nearest grove of trees, growing in groups as if they were connected by something invisible, weightless. He carefully made his way through the tall thickets, and with each step he felt more and more warmth surround him, as if the forest was taking him into its arms. The crowns of the trees were so thick that they seemed like a living dome, cutting him off from the world. But that didn't scare him. On the contrary, with every step he took, he felt something inside him come to life. The trees here were not ordinary. Their trunks emitted a soft light, as if a liquid like glowing blood was flowing through their bark. The leaves rustled in time with his movements, as if welcoming him. Sometimes when Reed touched the bark, it vibrated slightly, like a living being, responding to his touch. As he approached one of these luminous groves, a shadow among the trees caught his attention. He stopped, tensing. Against the background of Vidiian's strange, almost artificial calm, any shadow seemed to be a violation of this harmony. He looked closer. And then she appeared. Luma came out from behind the tree. Her glowing figure seemed to be an extension of nature itself. There was no sharpness or fear in her movements. She moved so smoothly, as if she had never touched the ground but only glided along it. Her skin is light green, shimmering, merging with the surrounding nature, as if it was created to be a part of this world. Reed froze, unable to look away. The light of the trees was reflected in her eyes, but it seemed that they shone from within, like two small luminaries hidden behind the delicate shell of the eyelids. He stepped forward, feeling his heart begin to beat faster. His body trembled with a strange feeling, not fear, but something similar. Luma looked at him with such calm confidence that Reed felt as if she was waiting for him. But how could she have known he was coming? And why did her presence evoke in him such a response, as if they had already met, even though it was impossible? She took another step, and Reed felt a slight breeze, as if the planet itself was reacting to her movements. It wasn't an ordinary wind. It was a quiet, imperceptible sigh, as if something had awakened in the depths of the forest. Luma stopped a few steps away from him and raised her hand. She didn't speak, but her gesture was clear without words. She wanted him to follow her. Reed looked into her eyes. They were impenetrable, but at the same time alluring. It was a challenge he couldn't refuse. He took a deep breath and followed her. Each step brought him closer to her, but it did not diminish the feeling that she was part of something more than just a resident of this planet. They walked together through the forest. Time was losing its meaning. 2 suns hung above the horizon, and although the shadows grew longer, the day did not die. The light poured on them softly, obeying some invisible rhythm. The forest whispered around them, and Reed felt that with each step he was sinking deeper into this reality. Luma led him without looking back, but he could feel her presence, her breath, her energy. It wasn't just a meeting of 2 beings, it was more than that. They stopped on a small hill where the forest parted to reveal a view of the horizon. Below them lay the dormant plains of Vidiian, shimmering with colors that could not be described in human words. Luma stopped at the edge of the hill, her hair fluttering in the wind. The light of the falling rays of 2 suns illuminated her figure. She raised her hands to the sky, as if greeting something or someone. Reed froze next to her, feeling his body fill with a strange energy. It wasn't just a trip, it was a new stage in his life. Luma lowered her arms and turned to him. She didn't say a word, but there was something in her eyes that Jack couldn't decipher. It wasn't just a look, it was an invitation to a world that was deeper than he could have imagined. And so, under the light of the 2 suns of Vidiian, he stood in front of her, in front of this unfamiliar, but somehow native being. Reed Larson was an explorer, but even he did not expect that the meeting with this planet would begin so unexpectedly. Vidiian continued to open up to him, its strange beauty captivating. It was a world breathing some kind of primal force, and the feeling of being close to life was almost tangible. The ground beneath his feet did not just accept his steps, it responded to them. As if every path, every tree knew that he was here, that he had come, and had been waiting for his arrival for many millennia. The air was sweet, full of the smells of herbs and unknown flowers, which with every breath gave him a strange feeling of cheerfulness, as if the planet itself supported his strength. On the 3rd day of his stay on Vidiian, he decided to go deeper into the forest. Up to this point, he had been cautiously exploring the surroundings, as if testing this new world for tolerance towards a stranger. He was used to the fact that many planets could be aggressive, and even if nature was not hostile, the conditions themselves could be unbearable for humans. But Vidiian was not like that. He attracted Reed, pulled him into his dense forests, as if inviting him, promising something great, hidden from prying eyes. His footsteps became more confident as he moved deeper into the forest, pushing aside the soft, velvety leaves that seemed to part in front of him, leaving no traces. The trees here were taller than on Earth, with thick, twisting trunks covered with what looked like bioluminescent bark. This crust emitted a faint, barely noticeable light that reminded of the stars in the night sky. The forest itself seemed to glow from within, but Reed still couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. And this observation was not hostile. It was rather the feeling of a gaze, but curious, as if the forest itself was a conscious being watching his every move. He stopped, feeling that he should be on his guard. An inner instinct, developed over the years of working in alien worlds, told him that something was coming. The air around them became denser, more saturated, and even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The light breeze that used to blow over his face disappeared, and was replaced by silence, the silence that usually precedes something meaningful. Then he saw her. She appeared silently, from behind one of the huge trunks, like a shadow merging with the surrounding forest. At first glance, she seemed to be a part of nature itself. Her figure, shrouded in soft light, seemed to be an extension of trees and vines. Reed froze, feeling something between surprise and admiration. It wasn't like an ordinary encounter with another being. It was like a revelation, an awakening. She came out from behind the tree, stepping so lightly that it seemed as if she hadn't touched the ground. Her skin glowed with a soft green light, like the trees themselves, and her long blonde hair fluttered behind her, as if they were part of the wind. The leaves on her head, like a crown, emphasized her connection with this planet. Her eyes were large, without pupils. They shone with a soft light, like the glow of the moon reflected in water. She was beautiful, but not the kind of beauty that people are used to. It was something else, something ancient and incomprehensible, like the very nature of Vidiian. She stopped a few steps away from him, not looking away, and Reed felt an invisible connection run between them. It wasn't just curiosity. He saw something more in her eyes, a kind of inner light, as if she already knew everything about him before they met. It was the gaze of a being who existed beyond time, observing the world from within. Luma was the name that came to his mind, as if he had always known her name, even though she hadn't said a word. Luma didn't move, but her presence filled the entire space around him. It seemed that the forest responded to her appearance, and its trees, Branches and leaves reached out to her as if greeting their mistress. Her breath blended with the whisper of the forest, and her every breath was like the sound of a distant waterfall. Reed took a step forward, trying to get a better look at her, and felt the space around them become thicker, as if they were in a closed capsule where only the two of them existed. She looked at him, and Reed felt that all his thoughts and intentions were becoming transparent, as if her eyes could see through flesh and mind, penetrate into the very depths of his soul. It was both disturbing and delightful. Her eyes were not human. There was no human expression in them, no emotion that Reed could understand. But still, he couldn't tear himself away from her gaze. It was as if he was pulling him inside, absorbing his thoughts, clearing them of everything superfluous. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. There was too much inside him to express it in ordinary phrases. It seemed that their meeting did not require words. They were superfluous, interfering with what was happening on a deeper level. Luma took a step forward. Her movements were smooth, like the movement of water, and with each step she got closer, but she did not violate his space. She did not intrude, did not press, but her presence became tangible, almost physical. She raised her hand, and Reed, barely aware of what he was doing, held out his hand to meet her. When their hands met, he felt something like an electric shock, but it didn't hurt. On the contrary, his body was filled with warmth, and he felt his heart stop for a moment, and then beat faster. Her skin was smooth, cool to the touch, but this coolness was pleasant, soothing. Luma looked at his hand as if she were examining it, studying its texture and shape, as if it were an object she had never seen before. But there was no fear or doubt in her movements. It was a study of pure, sincere curiosity. She squeezed his hand lightly, and Reed felt a wave of warmth run through his body. For a moment, everything froze. The forest, which had been whispering softly in response to their movement, was now silent. It was like a pause, like a moment of absolute calm, when time itself seemed to stop to give them the opportunity to feel each other better. Luma released his hand, but her gaze remained fixed on him. She took another step back and slowly turned around, motioning for him to follow her. Reed couldn't refuse. He knew that this meeting was not an accident. He knew he had to follow her wherever she led. His legs, as if moved by something beyond his will, began to move, and he followed her deeper into the forest. She led him through dense thickets, but in front of her the forest seemed to part, giving them away. It was like a ritual, a journey deep into Vidiian's heart, where his secrets were hidden. Reed felt like he was getting closer to something important, something that would change his life forever. They walked for a long time, or maybe it was only a few minutes, he didn't know. Time was losing all meaning here. But his every sensation was heightened. Every sound, every breath was part of a single rhythm. Luma didn't speak, but her silence was more expressive than 1,000 words. Eventually they came to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was an ancient stone covered with patterns glowing with a soft green light. Luma stopped by the stone, putting her hand on it, and Reed felt the very ground beneath them begin to vibrate softly. It was a strange sensation, not threatening, but powerful, as if the planet itself was responding to her touch. Reed came closer, looking at this stone. It was ancient, much older than anything he had seen before. It was more than just a natural formation. It was an artifact created by the hands of those who had been here long before them. Luma turned to him, and that mysterious light flashed in her eyes again. She raised her hand and pointed at the stone. Reed came closer and gently touched its surface. As soon as his fingers touched the stone, he felt his body filled with new energy, powerful and alive. It wasn't just a stone, it was Vidiian's heart, his ancient power, and now it was transmitted to him through touch. Luma watched him, her face remained calm, but there was a light of understanding in her eyes. Reed knew that from now on their lives were connected. The moment Reed touched the ancient stone, feeling its pulsation under his fingers, his consciousness seemed to expand for a moment. It was not just a cold, inert stone, it was alive, like the planet itself, a breathing creature that hid thousands of secrets. The energy that permeated him flowed like blood in his veins, connecting him to every tree, every branch, every blade of grass growing in this forest. It was the center of Vidiian's universe, her heart, and now it had revealed to him a small fraction of its power. Luma, who was standing next to him, carefully watched his reaction without uttering a sound. There was that silent challenge in her gaze that she had thrown at him more than once. Will you accept what I show you? Will you feel the depth of what lies beyond your human understanding? When the stone responded, strange, indistinct images swirled in Reed's head, flashes of light, shadows, faces that were barely noticeable, but carried ancient knowledge with them. It was like a dream, like brief fragments of someone else's memory so ancient that his mind could hardly make sense of them. But it didn't matter. he felt that he needed to move on. Luma slowly moved away from the stone and motioned for him to follow her. This gesture was not just an invitation, it was a call to something more, to something unknown. Reed understood that they were now entering new territories. There were trails inside the forest that were hidden from prying eyes, and he was allowed to see them. She moved forward, stepping so lightly and noiselessly, as if the forest had known her since birth and accepted her as a part of itself. Reed followed her, feeling his feet slowly sink into the soft, moist earth. At that moment, the forest began to change. The shadows around them grew longer, but they were no longer dark. The darkness, which had seemed frightening at first, now sparkled with thousands of small lights, as if the stars in the sky had decided to illuminate their path. Luma, without turning around, continued to lead him forward, and with every step she took, the forest seemed to obey her will. The trees bent down, the grasses parted, revealing narrow, barely noticeable paths that had not existed before. These were trails hidden from the eyes of any traveler, but now they became accessible to Reed, as if his presence was also recognized by the planet. The silence that enveloped the forest was not dead. It was the silence of expectation, of foreboding. Every sound, every movement around him was perceived in a new way. Reed could hear the faint crackle of branches under Luma's feet, the rustle of leaves rolling over her skin as she passed the trees. He felt her power not as something physical, but as a pulsating wave emanating from her and penetrating into every living being around. After passing through the grove, they went deeper into the forest, which became thicker. The trees stretched towards the sky, their trunks became thicker and their crowns wider. The light coming from the bark illuminated their path, but not completely. It was muffled, barely noticeable, and it seemed that the forest itself wanted to preserve its mystery without revealing itself to the end. With each new trail, Reed felt the space around him shrink. It seemed that they were not just moving on the ground, but as if they were moving to another dimension. He sometimes lost his sense of direction. It was impossible to tell which was east, which was west. The suns of Vidiian, which should have been overhead, disappeared from view, and now he felt as if everything around him was immersed in a soft green haze, as if they were surrounded by a whirlpool of light and shadow. They moved slowly, and Reed lost track of time. The seconds and minutes stretched out. The paths, which seemed endless, opened up more and more new paths in front of them, but it wasn't an easy walk. Every step, every movement was filled with meaning that he couldn't figure out yet. He felt fragments of the picture that Luma had shown him gradually forming in his mind, but she was in no hurry to reveal it completely. Sometimes, after passing through a particularly dense part of the forest, he felt the forest around them begin to breathe. It was a strange feeling. The air around them was thickening, becoming almost dense, like the water they were wading through. At such moments, he was surrounded by sounds, not the usual noises of nature, but something more. They were whispers, muffled voices that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. The words were indistinguishable, but they carried with them an ancient power, the story of Vidiian, a story that existed beyond time and that Luma was going to show him. And every time he turned to the source of that whisper, he saw the shadows behind him slowly converge together, as if trying to hide everything that was left behind. These shadows were alive, they moved, but not menacingly. They followed them as if they were part of the forest itself. Luma never paid attention to it, as if shadows were not something strange for her, but a natural part of this world. They found themselves at a huge arch created, it seemed, by nature itself. Two giant trees intertwined their branches, forming a portal through which light streamed. It was not an ordinary light, it shimmered in all shades of green, gold, and purple. This light was alive, and it seemed to reach out to them, as if inviting them to pass through the arch, promising something beyond human understanding. Luma stopped in front of the archway and turned her head to Reed. Her face shone with a soft glow, and her eyes, which reflected the universe, became even more expressive. She didn't say a word, but Reed understood that was the next step. She was inviting him to enter a new world, one that was hidden beyond ordinary perception. He took a deep breath, feeling his lungs fill with cool air that seemed fresh and dense at the same time. With each passing second, his mind cleared of thoughts, leaving room for one thing, for this step, for this transition. He didn't know what was waiting for him outside the arch, but his body and mind were ready. He followed Luma as if his own destiny had brought him here. As they crossed the threshold, Reed felt the world change around him. It wasn't just a physical transition. It was something much deeper. The feeling of heaviness disappeared, and in its place there was lightness, as if his body had lost weight, and his mind had become free from earthly worries and restrictions. A huge valley spread out in front of him, shrouded in soft light. The river winding along its bottom sparkled with thousands of lights, like stars reflected in the water. The valley was filled with flowers that glowed and shimmered in time with invisible rhythms. The wind, which had been cool before, became warm, enveloping like soft fingers touching the skin. But it wasn't just the wind, it was a feeling of the presence of something great, something that had always lived here. Luma slowly descended the slope, her footsteps leaving a glowing trail behind her. Reed followed her, feeling his body fill with energy from this place. Every blade of grass, every stone was alive, and he could feel their energy seeping into his being. The valley was a living organism, pulsating in unison with the forest, with the planet, and with time itself. Soon they were at the edge of the river. Luma knelt down and stretched out her hands to the water. At that moment, Reed noticed how the water around her palms began to glow even brighter, reflecting her light. She ran her hand over the surface, and the river responded to her, flashing with hundreds of lights, as if every movement of her fingers conveyed an order to the current itself. Reed watched her, realizing that he was now part of this ritual, part of this planet. Luma was not just a resident of Vidiian, she was his heart, his soul, his voice. Time on Vidiian has lost its usual linearity. For Reed Larson, the days merged into a single, vast canvas, where the light of two suns smoothly turned into a soft twilight, and the nights filled with stars seemed endless. He no longer tried to count the days or hours, it was pointless. The planet itself dictated the rhythm of his existence, weaving his consciousness into its pulsating energies. Gradually it became his home. He no longer felt like a stranger, as in the first moments after landing. But most of all, it was not the planet itself that changed him, but Luma. In the depths of the forest, where they now spent all their time, nature breathed with them. Reed realized that since their first meeting, everything had taken on a new meaning, saturated with subtle emotions that could not be expressed in words. Luma's every step, her every look, her every gesture, no matter how insignificant it seemed, was full of hidden meanings. Her presence was not just there, it penetrated his consciousness, transforming his perception of the world. Luma and the forest were one. It had been obvious for a long time, but now that they were spending time together, her connection to nature was becoming more and more obvious. The forests of Vidiian are not just trees and trails, they are a living organism that obeyed her will, moved and breathed with her. Their every step was accompanied by changes in the world around them. The trees whispered something inaudible, the crowns bent, the grasses trembled slightly, as if welcoming their mistress. Luma seemed to create trails where they had not been before, moving through the world like a guide into the unknown. The deeper they went into the forest, the clearer it became that the planet itself was reacting to their unity. When Reed first encountered Luma, he had not yet realized that her nature was so multifaceted, but now, after all the time spent with her, he felt that she was not just a resident of this planet, but something more. She was her essence, her energy, connected to all forms of life on Vidiian. And now Reed realized that he was a part of this world not only through his physical presence, but also through the bond that had formed between him and Luma. Their walks together, which became a ritual, turned into something more meaningful than a simple study. Every step in the forest was accompanied by the feeling that Reed was delving not only into unexplored paths, but also into himself. The inner world that he had been hiding from others for a long time was now opening up to him. Everything he knew about himself, about his past, about his human nature seemed to dissolve in this silent forest filled with ancient secrets. His feelings, which had long remained hidden behind the cold mask of a rational researcher, began to awaken. Luma moved ahead of him, her steps were silent, and her movements were smooth and natural. She seemed to glide across the ground, her figure blending into the shadows of the trees, and the green glow of her skin reflected the light coming from the bark of the trees. Every gesture she made, every glance she cast over her shoulder was like an invitation to something more than just communication. She didn't demand answers from him, didn't expect an explanation. She was just there, and that was enough. One day when the suns began to tilt towards the horizon, they came out into an open space, a huge clearing flooded with soft light. This place was different from anything Reed had seen so far. Here, in the middle of the clearing, stood a single massive oak with spreading branches that seemed older than the world itself. Its leaves rustled softly, as if telling their ancient stories. Flowers grew around the tree, strange, glowing with a bluish light, and grass that seemed transparent in the light of two tired suns. Luma slowly walked up to the tree and touched its bark. Her fingers glided lightly over its surface, as if she were reading an ancient text written in an unknown language. Reed watched her, feeling a previously unknown sensation rise inside him. It wasn't just admiration for her beauty or mystery. It was more than that, as if the planet itself was talking to him through her. He stopped a few steps away, not wanting to disturb her unity with nature. Luma seemed to be lost in her own thoughts, not paying attention to him, but Reed knew that she sensed his presence as clearly as he sensed hers. It was not a contact that required words or movements. It was a deep understanding that was born at the level of energy connecting them both. A few minutes passed, and Reed felt a strange tremor under his feet. The ground beneath him began to vibrate slightly, as if time itself was obeying Luma's will. Her fingers slid down the trunk of the oak tree, and at that moment something changed. The forest around became quieter, even the wind froze, as if the universe was waiting for something. Reed came closer, and when his fingers touched the bark, he felt the same discharge as when he first touched the ancient stone. Only this time the feeling was stronger, deeper, almost overwhelming. It was as if he had become a part of everything that surrounded them. His consciousness unfolded, and he felt the presence of thousands of lives, creatures that lived and breathed in this forest, as if the forest had revealed its secrets to him. He closed his eyes, trying to hold on to this feeling, but it overwhelmed him. It was an ocean of emotions that had been dormant inside him for a long time. Emotions that he hid even from himself because they seemed too deep and strong to be controlled. Now they have surfaced, breaking down all his barriers. The feeling that his soul was becoming a part of something great and ancient overwhelmed him. Luma continued to stand next to him, her palm still pressed against the tree, but her energy was now intertwined with his. Their forces combined, mixed like two streams, merging into one river. The planet responded to their unity, filling the air around them with the sweet scent of flowers that began to bloom under their feet. They didn't need words. It was an understanding that went beyond speech, beyond what could be explained through language. Their bodies seemed to vibrate in unison with the forest itself, and Reed felt his mind gradually stop resisting. Luma let go of the tree and slowly turned towards him. The light of the dying suns was reflected in her eyes. At that moment, Reed realized that his feelings, which had previously been vague and unformulated, now became clear and distinct. It was more than just a physical attraction. It was something deeper, more ancient. The bond between them grew, gained strength, like a growing storm. It was the union of two worlds that met here, in the depths of this forest, among the quiet whispers of the trees. Luma took a step towards him, and Reed felt a quiet call being born in his heart, which he could no longer ignore. It was not a call of reason. It was the call of something more ancient and inexplicable. He took a step towards her, and at that moment all the doubts he had ever had disappeared. His mind cleared, and he felt only one thing: the irreversibility of their connection. The forest seemed to freeze in anticipation. At that moment, everything became clear. Their destinies were inextricably linked. It was not by chance that their paths crossed. It was more than just a meeting of two beings. It was an awakening that was beginning at the very center of their being. In a world where time seemed to slow down to a barely perceptible rhythm, Reed Larson was on the verge of waking up. He felt like every element around him, every breath of the forest, every movement of the wind carried not only a physical presence, but also an energy, intangible and ancient. Everything on Vidiian breathed life deeper than he could imagine. This life flowed through Luma, through her touch, her silent presence that connected everything around. But now Reed felt that he himself had become a part of this great unified stream. Something inside him had changed completely, although he couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened. Perhaps it all started the moment his fingers touched the ancient stone, or perhaps it was when he first met Luma, who appeared from the shadows of the trees. After their last contact at the massive oak, Reed felt that there was an indissoluble bond between them. It wasn't a simple attachment or physical attraction. It was something more than the love that people are used to. It was akin to a cosmic connection, as if the planet itself had found a way to unite their destinies through its laws, known only to it. He was no longer just a man who had come from a distant land to explore the unknown. He had become something more, and it defied the usual comprehension. His every step was now full of strength, not physical, but spiritual, as if the earth itself was supporting him, and every touch of Luma felt like the touch of Vidiian herself. Luma, as if sensing this new round of their connection, led him further and further into the depths of the forest. They were moving along paths that did not exist to the ordinary eye. These paths opened up in front of them, as if nature itself was pointing the way, inviting them deeper into its bowels. Reed couldn't shake the feeling that he was traveling not only through the forest, but also through the inner corridors of his soul. The forests of Vidiian reflected his thoughts and feelings like a mirror, hiding in themselves the answers to all the questions that he did not even have time to ask. He followed Luma, immersed in the silent observation of her figure, emitting a soft light, dissolving among the trees. Time, like space, began to lose its meaning. They could have been moving for hours or just a few minutes. Reed didn't know. The suns of Vidiian, always hovering on the horizon like ancient guardians, now seemed less real than the forest around them. Everything around breathed a different reality, a reality where the past, present, and future were connected into one whole, and where Luma and Reed were not just travelers, but entities intertwined with nature itself. They crossed another section of dense forest and found themselves on a slope with a huge valley. Below, like fragments of a distant starry sky, lay mirrored lakes reflecting the light of two suns. This place seemed to be beyond the laws of nature that Reed had known since childhood. The mountains surrounding the valley towered like giant sentinels, and crystals glittered on their tops, emitting a faint but noticeable light. It seemed that these mountains were watching them as if they were uninvited guests, but not out of hostility, but out of an ancient curiosity that knew no time. Luma didn't stop. She stepped forward into the heart of this valley, her movements light and silent, as if her body did not touch the ground. As she walked, an invisible trail of light slowly trailed behind her, as if she was leaving behind some of her energy, like a firefly in the night. Reed followed her, feeling his heart beating in unison with the rhythm of this world. As they approached one of the lakes, the surface of the water began to fluctuate slightly, as if nature itself had responded to their presence. The water in this lake was not ordinary. It did not reflect the sky, as it usually does. She was more than just an element of nature. It was a living stream filled with energy that Reed could feel on his skin. The water glowed from within, as if 1,000 stars were hiding in its depths. It seemed so clean that you could look into it like a window into other worlds. Luma walked to the edge of the lake and knelt down, her fingers plunging into the water. The water seemed to respond to her, pulsing with soft waves of light that slowly spread over the surface, filling the space around them. Reed also sat down next to her and stretched out his hand to the water. When his fingers touched its surface, he felt a strong but not unpleasant discharge, as if his body instantly made contact with this energy. They were sitting by the lake, and time lost all meaning again. Luma, without taking her hands off the water, slowly raised her head, her gaze directed to the peaks of the mountains. Reed followed her example and saw the sky above them begin to change. The clouds that had been moving slowly along the horizon now curled into bizarre patterns, as if the planet itself had begun to draw some ancient signs in the sky that Reed could not understand, but felt their power. Suddenly, the forest behind them began to whisper softly. It was not the usual sound of wind in the foliage. It was the voice of the planet itself, speaking in a language beyond human comprehension, but Reed knew that it was no accident that he heard it right now. Luma seemed to sink into that whisper, her eyes closed, and she took a deep breath of air filled with mystery and antiquity. Reed felt the energy coming from the water, from the forest, from Luma itself, penetrating into him, enveloping every cell of his body. He was no longer just an observer looking at the wonders of nature. He was a part of her now. This union did not happen suddenly. It was gradual, like a gentle tide that slowly but inexorably floods the shore. Reed felt his consciousness expand as his body became something more than a physical shell. The light coming from the loom now enveloped him, becoming not only visible but also tangible. He could feel their energies intertwining, merging into a single whole, like two rivers that flowed parallel to each other, but now joined into one. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was a spiritual unity that couldn't be explained in words. It was more than love or passion. It was akin to a cosmic union that existed beyond bodies, beyond planets and stars. At that moment, Reed realized that he would never be able to return to his old life. Everything that had happened before meeting Luma had become an illusion, a simple dream compared to what he had experienced here on Vidiian. This world, this planet, and this being became his new home, his new reality. Luma wasn't just an alien, she was the embodiment of Vidiian's very nature, her soul, and now Reed was connected to this world as much as she was. Slowly, Luma stood up, her gaze still fixed on the sky. Reed followed her, feeling their bond grow stronger. The woods behind them began to sing softly. The melody that arose from the whispers of the trees was soft, but penetrated to the very heart. It seemed that the planet itself was singing to them, recognizing their union, their unity with this world. When Luma took a step forward, Reed followed her. They walked along the lake, which continued to glow. Their steps were light, as if they were floating through the air. At that moment, he no longer felt like an outsider on Vidiian. He was no longer an explorer from Earth. He was a part of this planet, a part of her soul. The forests that surrounded them began to glow with a soft light. The trees gave off a quiet, barely perceptible glow, and the grass under their feet trembled gently, as if welcoming their every step. It wasn't just a place where they were, it was a new world that they were creating together: Luma, Reed, and Vidiian. After that night at the Mirror Lakes, when Vidiian's energy seemed to unite Reed and Luma into a single whole, the world around them changed. Or perhaps they had changed themselves and now perceived reality differently, deeper, more fully. Reed no longer felt like just a traveler on a distant planet. All his thoughts about the Earth, about the past, seemed like ghosts, distant and insignificant. Now his existence was inextricably linked with this place, with Luma, and with that ancient rhythm that flowed through the planet, connecting all its inhabitants with its heart. The valley, surrounded by majestic mountains and lakes, now seemed to be the epicenter of something much more than just a place. She was a living organism that reacted to their presence, to their unity. When Reed and Luma connected at a deep level, everything seemed to come alive, pulsing in unison with their energy. It seemed that nature itself was filled with a power that went beyond ordinary perception. The first signs that their union had produced something more came a few weeks later. Reed began to notice that Luma began to change, but not in the way that it happens to ordinary creatures. She was no longer just a reflection of Vidiian's nature, she became its center, its heart. The whole forest, the whole valley responded to her slightest movements. She walked through the forest as if she had created it under her own footsteps. Flowers bloomed where she passed, the grass bent softly under her feet, the trees seemed to welcome her, spreading their leaves faster than usual. But the most significant change was that her body began to glow even brighter, as if a new life was emerging inside her, not just physical, but spiritual, connected to the very essence of the planet. Reed felt it, even though Luma didn't say anything. Their bond had become so deep that they no longer needed words to understand each other. It wasn't just intuition or guesses. He felt every change in her body as if it were his own. He knew that a new essence was awakening inside her. But this essence was something much more significant than a simple child. It was the birth of a new form of life hybrid, but not in the usual sense. Reed understood that this child would be connected to two worlds, the world of humans and the world of Vidiian. Every morning they went up to the lakes, which now shone even brighter than before. Their surface reflected the sky like a mirror, but it was not an ordinary reflection. You could see stars in the water even during the day, as if the lakes were windows to another world. Luma, as always, stepped barefoot on the soft earth, and at that moment Reed felt as if the whole planet seemed to breathe through her. He noticed that she stopped more and more often at the water's edge, dipping her palms into its luminous surface. The water responded to her touch. Circles began to spread around her hands, slowly and rhythmically, as if the water knew what was going on inside her. Luma stood motionless, her long hair flowing over her shoulders, as if becoming part of the light emanating from her body. And every time Reed watched her at such moments, he felt an unknown feeling being born in his own heart, not just a thrill, but the realization that his life had now changed forever. A few more weeks passed, and the changes around them became more and more apparent. Strange phenomena began in the forest. New plants that had not been there before began to appear where they passed. It wasn't just flowers or trees. They were creatures that seemed to respond to the energy coming from Luma. Their leaves glowed in the dark, and their stems moved as if following the rhythm of her heart. Life around them was accelerating, gathering pace, as if the planet itself was preparing for something great. And one day Reed realized that their unity gave rise to not just life, but something much more. They weren't just a couple connected by feeling. They have become a part of one great organism, a part of this planet, its integral element. Luma carried a life that was neither fully human nor fully Vidiian. It was a new species, a new being connected to space and nature, with energies that Reed could barely comprehend. They woke up earlier than usual this morning. The sky was clear. 2 suns shone on the horizon, coloring the forest in golden-orange tones. It was quiet around, only a faint breeze stirred the grass, and even the birds, who usually filled the air with their cries, froze, as if they were also waiting for something important. Luma slowly rose from the ground, her figure glowing with a soft light that had become even brighter in recent days. Reed looked at her with admiration and awe, knowing that this day would be a turning point. They headed for the lakes again, their steps light, as if the earth itself was supporting them, pushing them forward. The woods around them were silent, but this silence was not emptiness, but expectation. When they reached the water, Luma knelt down, her hands plunged back into the glowing surface. At that moment, the water around her began to shimmer, emitting light that spread across the surface of the lake like a flame, slowly engulfing the entire body of water. Reed moved closer, feeling the air around him become denser, more saturated. He could feel something changing not just in nature but in the air itself and the energy that flowed around them. He sat down next to Luma and put his hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her body penetrate him. The water around them pulsed, and then, as if obeying some ancient law, it began to rise, forming small waves that slowly dispersed across the lake. Luma became motionless at that moment. Her eyes were closed, but Reed knew that she felt everything as clearly as he did. Suddenly a faint glow enveloped her body, which grew brighter until the entire forest around them was filled with this light. It was not just a glow, it was the light of a new life, the light of birth. And then Reed felt it. A new energy appeared inside Luma, a new essence that was awakening to life. She was unlike anything he could have imagined. It wasn't just a child, it wasn't just a new life form. It was something cosmic, something ancient that came to this world through Luma. When the light reached its peak, Luma slowly opened her eyes. Reed saw her gaze change. There was something new in her eyes, not just wisdom or knowledge. It was a light that could not be explained in human words. It was the light of a new life, the light of the being she carried inside her. Slowly but surely, Luma rose from the ground, her movements as smooth as waves on the surface of a lake. Reed stood next to her, and at that moment he realized that they were not just witnessing a miracle, they were part of it. Everything around, every element of nature, every leaf, every blade of grass was associated with this event. Vidiian's life responded to the birth of a new entity, and now this entity has become a part of the planet, its heart, its whole. Gradually the light began to fade, and the forest was once again enveloped in a soft silence. But this silence was different. It was filled with energy, a new rhythm that was now beating in unison with Lum and Reed's heart. Everything had changed, and Reed knew that this day was the beginning of a new era for both of them. They returned to the valley, where everything was blooming and living under the light of two suns. Forests, lakes, mountains, all this has become native to them, a part of their essence. They were inseparable now.